Hello, everybody. Welcome to this evening's webinar with the Sport Coaching Leadership Program at Drexel University. I am thrilled to introduce to you all Dr. Larry Keiser. Tonight, we'll be speaking about winning strategies, innovation, and creativity in sport leadership. And before we get started, we're up to webinar number 21 since the pandemic started. So we've had some really interesting speakers. Coming up next week, one of my friends from the US Olympic Committee, Chris Clemens, will be talking about mentoring. He's done some work with both summer and winter sports, and he'll be talking about some of the work he's done at the high performance level. And then on the 25th, so 2 weeks from today, we'll be talking with TJ Buchanan, who's head of coach development with the US Lacrosse International Federation. He's going to be talking about how to develop coaches and athletes in the international context. So for those that were here yesterday, Madeline Bower did a great presentation on empathy and the art of listening. And then back in May, Sarah McQuaid also did a really great presentation on getting better at getting better. So today, Larry is going to be talking with us about innovation in these strange and uncertain times that we're living in. I think I've listened to Larry present on this concept a number of times in the last couple of months, and I can't think of a better person and a better topic to look at the obstacles, but also the ways to overcome the challenges that we're facing in these uncertain times. So, Larry, I'll hand it over to you with the screen share. Welcome. Thrilled that you can be with us, and looking forward to the next hour or so of presentation and discussion.
Thank you so much, Cam. Can everyone see the slides?
Looks good.
See the head shake, fantastic. So now you may have noticed that over the last few months that things aren't going the same way or working the same way they used to. And you notice that people, though, keep trying to fit and squeeze and jam the previous tried and true ways and the strategies that they've used in the past into the new problems that continually unearth themselves during these COVID days. Dealing with the physical space, virtual spaces in which we live and work, everything's been altered. And the way that we interact with each other, the way that you would interact with your students and athletes, depending on what level of coaching that you kind of run, changes on a daily basis. It just has to, or the way that you're imagining if you haven't started school, the way you're going to have to do things in the fall are just going to be so different. But it doesn't stop us from trying. In many cases, the core job requirements and priorities have significantly changed, but we have to keep doing what you want to do in order to feel normal. And again, that's why you go back to the tried and true. Well, it has to stop. There's something called functional fixedness, where you keep doing the same thing over and over again because that's the way you've always done it. And the first thing we need to do is accept reality. You have to do a personal check. Take a look at where you are and just realize that the way that you used to coach and the way that you used to handle and deal with people has changed. We need to take off the blinders so that we can identify the real problems and the real issues. We need to change our mindset, and that's the key. Changing the mindset from where you were to what's required in this new norm, to one that's more conducive to continued and ongoing critical thinking and problem solving, so that you can take new actions that will serve as the key to our thriving in the new normal or the new abnormal. As a plug for my program, which is why I do these things, it's all about me. It's that the creativity and innovation programs at Drexel believe pre-COVID-19 that creativity is and has been an untapped solution fountain for all areas of life and education, and businesses and corporations, including sports leadership coaching. And we believe it's even more strongly today. We believe it more strongly today and more passionately as we struggle as a community and collectively to safely reboot our schools and our economy and determine how we're going to operate in the fall moving forward. we believe that those who adopt create a creative mindset and approach the way that we operate and solve issues within each person's various domains or organizational structures or the workplace, the classroom, it will aid significantly in helping yourself, ourselves, our co-workers, our athletes, our players, our employees, students, to achieve and succeed in the field, as well as provide long-term creativity mindset and what we call the essential skills needed to continue to thrive as we rapidly approach, believe it or not, now the second quarter of the 21st century. It's just around the corner. In the area of sports leadership in particular, things have really changed from what I'm doing in my personal reading over the last 25 years. Your athletes seem more complex, less pliable, and more apt to fight for what they believe they deserve than ever before. They seem to be attracted to coaches who treat them with respect, care, concern, compassion, and as individuals outside of the sports arenas. As desires, wants, and rules, relationships, and regulations continue to rapidly evolve and change, leadership in the field need to also change the methods to accomplish what the athletes need to thrive. To develop a style, you need to develop a style that provides your athletes the opportunity to compete and achieve through what we call creative coaching. Leadership that emphasizes the importance of winning with the context of exploring and discovering one's full range of athletic and personal possibilities. And just to give credit where credit is due, all of that information, even before I get to the to what we're going to be going over tonight, really is has been paraphrased from work created by Dr. Jerry Lynch, who is a reported guru and mentor in the area of sport leadership coaching. And it's not dissimilar to what happens and needs to happen in business and education overall, both at the K-12 or pre-K-12 level and in higher education. So the agenda, what we're going to go over, let me just get this stuff out of the way. What we're going to go over tonight is, again, why creativity is important. What is creativity and what creativity is not. We'll go over the creative mindset and tools as it relates to sport leadership. And we'll talk about environments conducive for creating environments that creativity and innovation will thrive. And then lastly, leading for creativity. So we're going to start with some did you knows. And so because I primarily work with businesses and corporations and educational entities and organizations, and again, because it's so related, good leadership is good leadership. I'm going to start off by talking about the business and the corporate world. It's a given now that business is the #1 most in-demand essential skill required by any corporation or business when they're looking for new employees. And that's going to be very similar to people who are looking for coaches and sport leaders within their organization. On the left of your screen, you'll see creativity is a top human skill as reported by the 2018 Business Higher Education Forum that commissioned a analysis of resumes and job postings to determine foundational job skills and the demand of the digital economy coming up. Again, you'll see creativity was a top human skill. On the right-hand side is an even more recent analysis done by LinkedIn, where they went through their whole website and looking at the job resumes and position descriptions of jobs that are opened up and came out with these 5 top soft, we're no longer using that term soft skills, but essential skills: creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability, and emotional intelligence. All those are so key in the sport leadership arena. And both of those studies really harken back and support a seminal 2010 study done by the IBM Corporation, where they interviewed 1,500 CEOs across the world. And it was determined through surveying them that more than rigor, more than management discipline, integrity, or even vision, that the number one and necessary skill for navigating in this increasingly complex workplace that we're all living in requires creativity. Creativity is now essential, if not vital, to economic development and being competitive within the modern society. Creativity researchers are finding that jobs that don't require some form of creativity are increasingly being outsourced or automated. So there's no reason as a coach who needs to understand creativity to better work with your athletes to pass on the skills of creativity to your athlete. And if you happen to also be working in school teaching, to your students to thrive in the new economic world that we're coming up to. There's a huge need in education in particular to adapt curricula and lesson plans to provide instruction virtually. Changes to office workflows that are involved in processes, working with parents, handling anxiety of teachers, faculty, staff who may see themselves putting themselves at risk, working with a student population that one may or may not be keeping up with social distancing or mask wearing outside of school. These are all new types of problems and issues for which there just isn't one ready-made solution. We're tilling new ground with the we're tilling new ground with no off-the-shelf answer to set to plug in. It's a set shift. We need to break that functional fixedness I talked about of the past and working and teaching practices in order to, again, teach the skills needed for being creative in the workplace or in the environment or in school or in whatever domain you happen to be teaching. Well, this applies to sports coaching leadership also. Here on the screen, you'll see, it's the multi-dimensional model of leadership that was developed in 2007 by, you can see there, I can't pronounce the name, Sheila Dunk, I won't even try it. You can read it there. It's there. You can go to the source if you want the exact information. But it kind of expanded the leadership model and the factors of the pre-existing models to a more transformational model that rather than just focused on the leader or on the member or on the situation, to a model that encompassed all 3 of those factors, where it deals with the leader, the members, the organizational context, which also includes goals, structures, and processes. This revised model includes 3 states of leadership. In the middle here, you'll see the required behavior, which is defined by the situational characteristics, aka goals of the group, the type of task, whether it's individual versus team, the social and cultural context of the group, including gender, age, skill level, as well as the preferred behavior, where the leader actually, how the leader actually behaves based on the leadership characteristics. Here they're called mentor characteristics, personality, expertise, and experience, and willingness to abide. I want to go back, that was too soon. And willingness to abide by the players, the individuals, and accommodates members of their preferred behaviors. And the transformational model, the coach would change their own characteristics to fit the need of the situational characteristics, by these dotted lines. So we change the social characteristics that would have an impact on preferred behavior, but it kind of starts with the actual behavior. So you may already know this model. You may already understand how it all works. If not, you should go to this article and take a look at it. But it really talks about being transformative and dealing with new ways of change and the new ways of thinking, the new mindset, which we'll go into. But before talking about that, and the creative activity mindset that's necessary for constructing a new creative environment in order for, again, creativity to thrive, it's important that we have a common understanding of what creativity is, and more importantly, what it is not. And so we go to the, did you know that the concept of creativity is a fairly recent idea? In hindsight, before creativity was used, we used the term imagination. That was one most commonly used. The word creativity wasn't invented until the late 19th century. In fact, it doesn't appear widely in English dictionaries until after World War II. In a study of Webster's dictionary definitions of creativity from like 1953 to 2008, creativity was not a standalone word, but in fact was listed as a version of the word creative. So creative was the word that was explained by this non-defined term called creativity. And that occurred from like 1953 to 1976. In 1976, Webster gave it its own spot in the dictionary, with the definition that the creativity was the quality of being creative, the ability to create. And then in 1991, they added a few more details using the word originality and that creativity was meaningful. However, although linked, imagination and creativity are very different. Creativity gurus in my field, Kaufman and Sternberg being a huge duo, share these words. Whereas the mind can imagine virtually anything, no matter how fantastical or implausible in real life, creativity is concerned with other practical considerations. In fact, creativity researcher Robinson suggests that creativity is the meaningful application of imagination. Overall, creativity has really only been studied for the last 70 years in earnest. It's coalesced over the definition I share here that creativity is defined as the ability the ability or the process to produce work that is novel and appropriate. And so let's kind of move that into the sports leadership arena. The work is, coaching of the students, doing that in a novel way, AKA not the way you did it before, and appropriate. So it's appropriate to the sport that you're doing. Appropriate, again, means relevant and useful, as you can read here. But creativity itself is comprised of multiple components. We kind of think of creativity as being the umbrella. It's the top of the hood of the umbrella is kind of this thing called creativity that's comprised of various factors that make up creativity. And at Drexel, based on the literature and research out there in the world, we have narrowed those down to 11 various factors. Some of them you can read here, originality kind of being the stem, the most important one. But again, there's divergent and convergent thinking, the extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, being a risk taker, resistance to premature closure, elaboration, etc. Again, the 11 factors are kind of defined here. We'll just go over them very quickly. This PowerPoint slide will be sent to you, so you'll have them so no need to take notes, but feel free. But originality, again, novel and unique ideas, risk-taking, which I believe is one of the most important factors of creativity. A creative idea that's not implemented is worthless. So again, you have to have the inner strength to take a risk and try something new and be able to withstand the jeers and barbs that may come along with it. Fluency, being able to come up with a lot of ideas, flexibility, being able to do different categories of an idea, but be first divergent in your thinking, and then convergent, which we'll go over in just a second. And again, tolerance of ambiguity, being comfortable not knowing the immediate answer, and also very important to creativity, the resisting premature closure, remaining open to an idea and considering multiple solutions to a problem. The longer you can stay open, the more chance a good creative idea will emerge. But let's take a look at the creativity problem-solving process. Again, creativity in much of literature starts with divergent thinking. You have a problem, and then you try and think of as many ideas as possible until you have a whole slew of ideas, and then you put on your convergent thinking hat, so to speak, and you start narrowing those down. You start weeding out the possibilities. Where people go wrong is when they're in the divergent thinking mode, they start editing, which is not a good thing to do in the creativity process. You want to, when you're brainstorming, any idea is a good idea. You never know where it's going to take you in terms of another idea. And then you edit during the convergent phase. And so that is really the problem-solving model, which is kind of listed here. It's from Tanner and Reisman in this book listed. But again, you start off with divergent thinking, as I shared. You think of multiple paths and solutions to solving that problem, and then you call those solutions down till you get to a point. When you have a point where a couple of different options, really good ones, and then you engage in divergent thinking again and kind of pull those ideas apart and all those various components, expanding the ideas that you now have until, again, you have a slew of them. And then you start the convergent thinking process to narrow and whittle those ideas down till you have something even better than before. And then you engage in the divergent thinking process again, and that goes on and on and on and on until you believe you have a solution that you're happy with. There is no stop and start. You just want to do it a number of times until you're comfortable with the answer. But creativity research tells us, these are kind of the highlights of the research, is that to be creative, you need to start by thinking that you're creative. Just be creative. It's really not rocket science there. You've got to get out of your head and any negative thinking, in particular, that you're not creative. That's where people go wrong. I don't know how many times you might hear it from your athletes or your students, if you're also a teacher, that I'm just not creative. That's bunk. Everyone's creative. The level of creativity will vary from person to person, but again, you can change and you can improve those creativity ideas, because creativity can be taught. On those 11 factors, if you go back to the umbrella concept, which I'm sure it was so colorful that it's ringing out in your head, you can see it perfectly, the colored umbrella with all those various factors hanging below it. You don't need to be great in every one of those factors. Again, it's the combination of those factors that people have at different levels that that form their creative profile. Where are the strength areas? How do you capitalize on your strength? You really have to understand that. And there are assessments out there in the world that will help you. One of them being the RDCA, the Reisman Diagnostic Assessment of Creativity, which I helped our School of Education founder, create, and can go over that with you if you'd like down the road. But again, creativity can be taught. Going back a bit further, going up again, just be creative. There's a psychology out there that you fake it until you make it, or and you kind of like can change your way of being. Like when you're unhappy, if you force yourself to smile and just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, regardless of your mood, pretty soon you will become happy. It's been proven and documented, just the idea that your face is in that smiling mode puts you into that mindset, that way of thinking. And there are other tools and techniques, again, that can do that for each of the 11 factors. And again, that's kind of what our program is all about in the creativity area. But in addition to creativity being taught, you need to know that creativity is intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. When happy accidents happen, yay, but you have to be able to recognize it. But so much better that, we understand that some people are more naturally creative than others, but with practice and intentionality, the more you try and think of yourself as being creative, the more research tells us that you will be creative because you're starting to act with a creative mindset. Again, so you want to kind of just be very intentional and commit to that. And research also shows that leaders who recognize and understand their own creative strengths are better able to recognize the creative strengths of their others, other people that they work with, their students, or their athletes, or their employees if they happen to be in the business world. And thereby they're better able to adapt the interventions to that individual to assist that individual in success and succeeding. What I want to go over now is to really start by doing this exercise as a group. Normally, it would be more interactive, but since there's all of you online, and I'm the only one that really has the mic and the screen, I'll kind of work it out with you. But this is one of the key factors for breaking your current mindset. You have to be, in order to be more creative, you have to be able to challenge and break all assumptions. When I say all assumptions, I mean all assumptions. So let's start here. Here are 9 dots. In your hand, or in your eye, mind's eye, or on the screen using your finger, try and connect those 9 dots together with no more than 3 straight lines, which will cross all 9 dots without lifting your finger or your mind's eye pencil. For time's sake, I'm going to spoil it for you, but do know that research shows us that when doing it or attempting this exercise, a large number of people will make 2 assumptions. First, they'll make the assumption that one cannot extend the line beyond the outside of the dots. Number 2, the lines must pass through the middle of each dot. Well, when you break those assumptions, and of course, neither of those rules were stated in the instructions, but when you break that assumption, it's not that hard to do. It gets a little bit easier. Now, problems are often conceived or viewed with the assumptions baked in that hinder creativity. Now, what if I told you that I could actually use one straight line to connect all the dots? Not only in one way, but in 2 ways. Now, I can hear you now. You're saying, no, Larry, that's impossible. It can't be done. I need to see it to believe it. Well, here's seeing it. I could rearrange the circles into a straight line. And so, did you think about moving the circles so that they weren't arranged as they were? If not, that was an assumption you made. I never said you could not move or change the dots. Or you could get one big giant fat pencil or marker and put it down the middle. Did I say, the line had to be a very narrow line? There are things such as fat lines. Again, break the assumption. There are also techniques that can be used to help one become better at shaking up and challenging assumptions. Like everything, creativity takes practice. The more you do it, the better you get. The more creative you become. But one of the tools that we use in our creativity courses is the false faces technique. It's a technique for reversing assumptions, hence breaking the assumption. So it comes from a book called Thinker Toys, A Handbook of Creative Thinking. If you don't have the book, you might want to purchase it. It's really, really an excellent tool. But let's start with this false faces technique, where number one, you start by stating a challenge. You then list the assumptions about that challenge. And for this particular exercise, we'll start with 3 or 4. Then you go through a process of reversing each assumption, where you write down the opposite of each one, and you try and look at it at a different, from a different viewpoint. And then you ask yourself, when you have those assumptions down, how you might accomplish the task by reversing each of those assumptions. Again, as I stated, reversals interrupt conventional thinking patterns, thereby freeing up your mind to put in new information in different new provocative ways. So, reversing assumptions. Again, state the challenge. For this particular exercise, we're going to do the challenge that you desire to start a new restaurant. I don't know where you all live, but here in Philadelphia, we still cannot go inside restaurants. We can only eat outdoors. So restaurants are always trying to find new ways of handling and doing things. So here we have, start a new restaurant is the challenge. List your assumptions, the next step. So we have an assumption, restaurants have menus, I mean, either written, verbal, or implied. They charge money for food. Well, that kind of makes sense. You know, restaurants need to make money. That's why you do it. And that restaurants serve food. Those seem like good assumptions. So now we have to try and reverse those assumptions. So number one, restaurants have menus. The reverse would be restaurants have no menus of any kind. Restaurants charge money for food. Restaurants give food away for free. And then restaurants serve food. How about a restaurant where you do not serve food of any kind? So now you kind of think about it and you come up with the solution. You know, how could you accomplish or reverse, or how can you accomplish each of these reversals? So, new screen, the information from 1 to 3 is the same. We now go into 4. Again, asking ourselves how we accomplish each of these reversals. For the first one, restaurants have no menus. Perhaps the chef informs each customer, he goes to the market and buys things and he shares with them what he has. And then the customers select what foods they like and the chef creates a new kind of dish for that customer. Or for the second one, restaurants give food away for free. Rather than paying for the food, the customer pays for the time inside the restaurant, where you know, they pay by the minute or by the half hour, and again the menu's kind of open. They kind of pick what they want. They get served, but again they're paying for their time within that they stay inside the restaurant to eat. Restaurants do not serve any food. Restaurants. How about a restaurant that has a unique decor, or or it's located in an exotic place with a view that overlooks, say, the Grand Canyon or something, where people bring their food to the restaurant and then kind of eat within that establishment, paying for perhaps silverware or perhaps tablecloths or perhaps maybe beverage service or something of that kind. So then you kind of ask yourself from these reversals, which one's going to work best for you? And then kind of build that out. And so in this one, we selected, because it's just me, the chef informs each customer what he bought at the market each day, and the customer selects what they find appealing. And then, so that's easy enough to do. But to even make it better, the chef then names the dish after the customer, and on the receipt prints out the recipe for that person to take with them when they leave. That might be a doable restaurant, and then you continue fleshing out all the various components. You have to train, again, as I said, there's no accident to creativity. It's very intentional. It's very specific. It's problem solving to a need. It's not hilly-nilly. Even when you get into the works of art, an artist is always trying to say something through their painting. Otherwise, it's really not art. But there's another exercise that you might want to use. It's based on De Bono's theory of problem identification and problem exploratory tools that he uses, which he terms as the 6 thinking hats. And here they are here, where in this scenario, a group or an individual takes turns putting on each of these hats and looking at a problem, and more importantly, going through the creative problem solving process, convergent, divergent, convergent, divergent, convergent thinking that we went over earlier. But then you have a solution. And then you put on your hat and you start looking at the solutions from various perspectives. The white hats in some classes when it's being taught, at least before lice became a real big problem, people would actually put on various hats because it's just a way of remembering what to do and to make it more interesting and fun for students. But you can do with slips of paper, or you can have this written out and or print this page out and then tell people, let's go to the white hat now, where the function of the white hat is to be objective, where you look at the problem from a viewpoint of being factual. Again, describing the information that is there. And then you kind of go through, everyone wears the same hat during this process, and the whole group or the individual looks at that solution through each of these lenses. And then you go to the black hat, trying to be negative, playing devil's advocate about why something won't work. And then the green hat, the red hat, etc. It has these various components. Again, by the time you're done through all the hats, you will have played with your solution long enough to have developed something that addresses the concerns of the black hat, using the language of the white hat to the positivity of the yellow hat, etc. Those are 2 ways to try and break out of the functional fixedness that I talked about earlier. Teresa Amabile, who is a guru and researcher of creativity, mainly for business, but it goes beyond business. She provides, 6 lessons from the world of business that are transferable to not only the world of sport leadership, but into education as well in general. But the first one is that you have to challenge yourself as a coach, but as well as challenge those you're working with, your co-coaches, your players, if you're a teacher, your students, if you're in business, your employees. to stretch their thinking. You've got to challenge them, but you don't want to go, and the art of this particular component is knowing how far you can stretch the student, the athlete, the player, etc., without breaking them. And so it's very important, and this will become a theme. It's important that a coach understands and knows the individual athlete. But there's a freedom that needs to be offered to the athlete and the coaching, where you provide choices and you're listening to their ideas and building in space for each to decide how they want to pursue their objective. And so it's teamwork, it's collaboration, where you as the coach have an idea, but your mentee or your athlete might have a different idea, and then how do you combine those two worlds together to make it all fit together in a way that works. And more importantly, going back to the 11 factors, working with intrinsic motivation. I think I may have bypassed when it came to those. Again, let's go back to the umbrella with the factors hanging. You saw the intrinsic and the extrinsic motivation factors. In creativity, intrinsic motivation is preferred. Doing something for the love of doing it rather than be rewarded. In all creativity research shows that the individual succeeds quicker, they hit success quicker, and that their creative ideas are better and they're just more successful at what they're trying to do, rather than based everything on an extrinsic motivation, doing it for a reward. So as a coach, you want to win, because again, the glory, that's kind of extrinsic, but it's also very intrinsic, that feeling one gets. But they want to do it to better themselves and to make themselves, it's that self-affirmation that they're kind of the best that they can possibly be. But you want to develop as much of that as possible. Again, that not only plays for athletes, but plays in the education world, dealing with students. It plays in the business world, where employees are better when they're more intrinsically motivated. You need to have the time and the resources, and you need to build in time to grow and for incubation, particularly when it comes to the mental component of being an athlete. And so recognize, as I'm sure you probably already do, that it takes time to build up speed, stamina, and things of that sort. But in terms of the brain, it takes a while for people to realize where their block is, what their limit is, and then how to overcome that limit. You need to develop teams and group activities. Even when you're kind of working individually, it works better, if an individual has some sort of societal connection, if not society as a whole, but as a small group of players on a part of a team, so they can be more collaborative. And creativity, even when you think you're being creative by yourself, it really is done in partnership. It's very rarely done in isolation or alone. And that's, again, you as a coach or a sport leader dealing with athletes or other coaches and things of that sort are really working as a team. And again, working as a team requires practice. So the more one does it, the better one gets. You need to, let's just say that sport leaders, coaches, very akin to business leaders and teachers, principals, superintendents, we know that everyone gets busy, and it becomes easy to let praise for creative efforts go by the wayside. Whether the effort is successful or unsuccessful, I ask you to keep that in mind, that you want to recognize it. You want to recognize successful creativity when it happens, and you want to recognize the attempt at creativity when it doesn't happen. An easy way well, the only way for that not to happen is to just make a big note and keep it in your, and as part of your way of being, not to let it happen. Leadership can kill creativity within a player, an athlete, an employee, a student, or a class, just by failing to acknowledge creative and innovative efforts, or repeatedly squelching them. Squelching is when you, before they even get the idea out, you start saying it's not going to work. No, that won't play. We've tried it before. It doesn't happen. No, it doesn't make sense. We don't have the resources, etc. Squelching ideas just shuts people down, and it stops them from attempting and trying, and that you don't want to do. But that's a presentation onto itself. But reacting negatively to a creative idea has the potential to create a climate of fear to try, which is why it's important that you recognize and give praise for unsuccessful efforts to boot. Not doing so undermines intrinsic motivation. And again, we want leaders to use their creativity to recognize the creative potential in their students and in their athletes and in the work that they're doing. And last, Amabile shares that sport should also include, well, she doesn't say sport specifically, but translating what her model to the sport world needs to include creativity efforts and the evaluation of performance. Now, similar to school leadership, where they need to encourage teachers that do creative work, and I believe they should incorporate creativity efforts into teacher evaluations. But again, it goes kind of back to the recognition, but a way to do that is to recognize them in a formal setting, to really set the idea that creativity is important. I implore you though too, even if you don't have the organizational support of your institution, that you still have to try and move forward with creativity. It's the way of the world. Whether you're alone and you're doing it, you could start a grassroots movement when people see success. So go for it. Lord, I'm running out of time here. So creative leadership and requires creating a creative environment. And the first thing to do is to understand that your players, your students, your employees, wherever world you happen to be in, or if you're doing multiple worlds, as a manager or a teacher or a coach, that there's been typically a misinterpretation of the way people act and behave. Creative people dislike routine. Again, some people, in leadership look at that as being a bad thing. Many creative people like self-direction. Again, as a coach, you might not want to hear what your athlete has to say. Again, you want to always hear them out because they have a way of doing what they think is best for them. They might, not maybe, in athletics, it might not be the case, but they do enjoy daydreaming, creative people. And they will pursue, though, in all fields, a task that interests them longer than those who are not creative. And they have a questioning type personality. When you tell them to do something, they ask you why. How does that fit in? Why? But why? But what if I did this? But why are we doing that? So there's some creative characteristics now, again, of a creative person. High level of curiosity, willingness to learn from experience, persistence in tasks, and even including situations where they know they're going to fail, they'll still try and play it out to see how it ends. They have high levels of energy, they tolerate contradiction, they can tolerate ambiguity and uncertainties, not knowing where the problem is going to lead them. They're goal-oriented, they see problems as being complex, they embrace change, they prefer doing new rather than the old and established, and they process knowledge from a wide variety of fields. So to be a creative leader, to create a creative environment, the most effective drivers for doing so is trust, having appropriate challenges, providing respect and recognition, particularly when it comes to creative ideas, provide understanding, and have honest communication with in the sports leadership world with with your athletes. The creative leaders, they set direction, they provide the expectations, they motivate by praising, they provide resources, they recognize and share success, and then they're willing to get the heck out of the way. When you see something clicking in an athlete, when you see something clicking in an employee or a student, rather than to delve right in, engage in your own creativeness and your own creativity, and resist that urge to come to premature closure where this is the answer. Let it play out, and then decide what the answer is, or if this new routine is worth it, or if this new activity or this new way of dealing with the situation is working. You've got to try things out, and then you have to give it time. Go back to Amabile's 6 helpful hints on not killing creativity, and let things kind of play out. And most importantly, be an idea champion. Learn the language of creativity, innovation, and then use it, as well as commit to a sustained effort at being creative and creating environments where people feel safe enough to try new things in this new world and this new environment in which we all find ourselves. Shameless plug again, the School of Education's Creativity and Innovation programs, as well as the sports leadership programs, have resources that can assist you in your work. We have an undergraduate certificate that we only offer at the undergraduate level in the Creativity and Innovation program. But both programs have graduate certificate programs. We're developing non-credit workshops, not only in creativity and innovation, but I believe CAM is also doing that in sports leadership or sport leadership. And again, we have concentrations that we are expanding to other programs, so that in my world, I would like everyone to work through the lens of being a creative person with a creative mindset, and encouraging and creative environments to thrive and grow. And that's kind of the, well, that's not kind of, that is the presentation. And now I believe that, Cam, we're opening up to questions. Is that what
Yeah. We're typically pretty close to the top of the hour, and we may have a little bit more questions and time for those that can stick around after that. But Larry, you touched on a little bit on the assessment tool. I know there are a number of different assessment tools out there, but do you want to just go back to that in terms of how people may want to either do an assessment, gauge sort of where they're at in terms of individually, but also within the organizations they work with?
Yeah, well, where I'll start is with the RDCA, the Reisman Diagnostic Creativity Assessment. It is a free assessment. We make it available as a Qualtrics website. It's a 40-item Likert type scale assessment that takes maybe 8 minutes to do, but you receive the feedback immediately about where your mindset is on those 11 factors. It's a self-assessment, so it's not judging your creativity. It's judging or assessing your mindset at that moment, where you stand in terms of thinking about that particular factor. So it will tell you whether or not you have a intrinsic motivation mindset or an extrinsic. It will share whether you have a mindset that is open to tolerance of ambiguity or resistance to premature closure and things of that sort. So I will include that. I don't have it written on here, but when Cam sends out the presentation, I'll be sure that he includes that free link for you to use. You can use it over and over and over again. And again, you feel free to share that with your co-coaches or your athletes or your fellow teachers or again, but it gives you a profile of those 11 characteristics where you are strong in the mindset, or as the force be with you, where you are strong in that particular area, or where you might be weak. There are other more formal assessments that cost money, such as the Torrance test of creative thinking. It is not a self-assessment. It is a standardized, normed, referenced assessment where, again, it takes a look at you and the way that you are being creative and your view of creativity. But it's actually predictive because it's been normed and standardized. You can show where you are in relationship to the rest of the world on the creativity factors. It's kind of expensive to do. It's, to have it graded, it's $20 a test, which is why we kind of developed the RDCA and put it out there. The point of the RDCA is just to introduce people to the world of creativity, to make them understand that creativity is not just one thing, that is comprised of various factors. But there are other free creativity assessments that I will that look at it from things from a different point of view that I'll also include with the RDCA link when I forward it to Cam.
Cool, Larry. I've heard you talk about this before, but it was a new level of clarity in your discussion today, your presentation, regarding in terms of the convergent, divergent way of thinking. How do people manage that? How do people to where you give enough scope for creativity, but it becomes quite limiting to, are there too many ideas for a potential solution? So how do you manage that in terms of discussions of creating a culture of learning and creativity, but also get the job done?
Okay, unfortunately, every other word is coming in and out. I don't know why that is. So I'm not really sure of the question. I didn't hear it. Could you just say it one more time?
Yeah, I'll try it again. Just in terms of how to go super broad and how to rein it back in terms of creative ideas. When you're brainstorming, when is it broad enough, and when do you have to narrow it back in between the convergent and divergent way of thinking?
Well, you always start with divergent thinking. You have the problem, you have the issue, and you start with divergent thinking to come up with the ideas. There is no set point. It's all going to be dependent on the problem you're trying to solve. The more complex the problem, the more potential solutions or solution components you're going to have. The simpler the problem, the fewer. It's really going to be trial and error to begin with. Again, you can practice these things by coming up with a problem, make it a simple problem, and just practice being divergent in your thinking. And then give yourself, maybe do a time limit. Say, I'm going for 3 minutes, where if you're doing it by yourself, or we, if you're doing it in a group, will just really engage in divergent thinking. It's actually kind of the brainstorming model that people really don't do correctly. But again, you come up with all the ideas, and then at 3 minutes you stop, and then you kind of weave them through in a convergent thinking fashion, and then set the timer again when you have those solutions for 3 minutes, and keep going. Over time, you'll experience a rhythm, and you'll know based on experience when you've kind of hit the peak. The ideas will kind of stop flowing. I mentioned that brainstorming, that many people do it incorrectly, is because what you need when you brainstorm is to have a leader that's really not participating in the activity, but is guiding the group. You need a recorder to do nothing except record the ideas. They don't participate. You need a leader that is going to make sure that people are not squelching, and that to encourage folks to keep coming up with the ideas, no matter how crazy and off the wall they get. When you're brainstorming, it's not the time to edit or to put value judgments on the solutions. It's the time to go wherever your mind goes, and someone else's thought, as crazy as it might be, might lead to another thought. And you'll be surprised that when you start trying to, you go into that convergent phase, you will see connections to the weirdest ideas that people came up with the more standard and more predictable concepts. That's where, and in between, where those two things fit, is that new creative solution, because you've looked at something in a completely new way. And if you broke your assumptions, you might be able to see the value on a new way of doing something.
No, I think that's really helpful, and particularly with the lens of De Bono's six hats there. I think that's a really, again, I've been familiar with his work for a long time, but I guess new times, desperate times, desperate measures, perhaps. Definitely that lens is a great way to just to sort of put those coloured glasses on and approach it for a certain time slot in a particular way. And I love that. I love that approach.
What that about creativity, though? I mean, whether you're doing the reverse assumptions or brainstorming, there's even something called negative brainstorming, which I love to do, where you start off with your group. Again, you have the same recorder and you have the same leader type situations where they're not participating. I did motivate as leader and record as recorder. But you have the group start off with all the negative reasons why an idea won't work, and you let them go. And again, they come fast and furiously. For some reason, mankind, human beings, we are very, we find it much easier to tear something down than to build things up. So when you're coming like why something won't work, people will come out of the woodwork, with ideas about why it won't work. And then you have a whole listing of things that won't work. And then you switch it around and become positive. You go through each of those ideas and you flip it to how would you solve that particular part of the problem. And then when you're done, you've addressed all of the negatives things and you've come up with a brand new solution. It's just a wonder when it does work. But all the processes are kind of the same. They're all doing the same thing. They're just different ways of approaching that creative problem solving process of divergent convergent thinking.
Two last questions, Larry. I'm respectful of people's time, but I'm so captivated by this topic, and I think it couldn't be any more relevant to what I'm having this conversation on repeatedly every day right now. What about for those that are either going through the job search process or in the process of interviewing candidates? How are you seeing folks integrate this either as something they want to show off, or from an interviewer's perspective of what are some of the questions or ways to assess an individual's creativity, particularly in this landscape now where we can't say, well, when you're in a situation like this before, like COVID, what would you do? So how are you seeing it used in the interview process from both sides?
Well, if the job position states that they're looking for someone to come up with new ideas or other code words that mean creativity or being innovative, then I would suggest that you use the language of creativity, such as convergent, divergent thinking, and talk about intrinsic motivation and and talk about those factors and how they can be used to motivate and to address issues and problems and look at things in new ways. You just really want to bring in that you, as the person seeking the job, have skills of critical thinking and being able, and you have not only, you're able to articulate a method for implementing critical thinking. And I think that would go a long way. And just vice versa, if you're interviewing people, you're looking for that type of mindset. You're looking for the way they explain, the way that they, the examples they give, and if you give them a scenario to solve, watching them kind of work through the process.
Love it, love it. And what about, as a final one, what about those that are in environments where the culture isn't receptive or open to creativity? How do you sort of shake the foundation and really bring people around to looking at doing things in different ways? I mean, in the sporting world, why change it when it's still working? But obviously the world around us is changing. But what's your gold nugget in terms of making that shift to cultures where they're just not open to the change?
Well, we saw the day, that I think the Big Ten decided today not to do football for the year. Again, then you look at the NBA, who came up with this bubble concept. And again, not only does it help the players, but it helps the economy for where those NBA players are being housed. And so, lots of towns have hotels that are getting ready to close and go belly up. I mean, if they would have thought about some of these ideas and the whole bubble concept much earlier, then perhaps they could have done something at their local institutions, which I'm sure has hotels and things around that are not going to be filled up with people attending events, that they could have used to house all the players. I mean, there's so many things that could have been done to kind of save the season. Again, share that idea with people who aren't buying into the idea of creativity is important. But if you really are in an environment where the leadership isn't buying into the concept of creativity as a solution to anything, then the best way of doing it is to try it in the realm or the world that you do have power over and be successful. And then when people ask you why, you point out how creativity has assisted you. Other coaches who see you being successful will ask you what you're doing. Coaches talk, you can share and spread that way. Leadership will eventually come down and say, they'll notice. And that's when you have the opportunity to explain, and hopefully it will catch on. But it has to be more of a grassroots type of movement. Unless, of course, you are the leader, then you can make it kind of top down. But you can't force people to be creative. They have to buy into it. So you need to explain to them how it can be useful and helpful.
Great. Larry, you've definitely pushed me to take the challenge, take it on, and give it a crack, because it's certainly something that for many of us, I think many people that are gravitating towards these calls, these webinars, this concept, are really looking for different ways to approach it. And I do appreciate your time and really great strategies. And I have to share with you that restaurant analogy I've used more times in the last couple of weeks since you shared it. I think it's everyone can relate to it. I think that's the wonderful thing about that example, that I grew up in restaurants, my family were in restaurants, and to rethink even the very concept that people need to eat, we're having to do that, whether it's the basic drive-through solution that many restaurants have. That's not a new thing, but really thinking outside of the box, the square, the circle, the pyramid, whatever, because it really is. We need these strategies to really turn a positive light on it. And I also love that strategy of looking at all the negatives. Start off with all the negative, with all those negative Nellies in the room, and say, okay, let's use your expertise, and then flip it on them. So I love that.
It is fun, and more importantly, that people get tired of being negative. So when it comes time to reverse it to the positive, you feel a collective sigh in the room going, oh, thank God. Because even then, when you have everyone being negative, it's like, oh, you start hating it. It's like, can't we say something positive?
Yep. I love it. And Lee, you're right. Lee Elias, one of our faculty, have mentioned that the NHL also doing a wonderful job of the bubble, and I think that's transferring over. The US Open are looking at it in preparation for the tennis up there in New York, and then inevitably, I think that's the only way the Olympics are even remotely going to be able to happen in Japan next year. So yeah, Larry, awesome stuff. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Not a problem. Good to see you.
Well, if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to email me, and I'll definitely get everybody out the presentation. And thanks everyone for joining us. And Larry, as always, we'll have to bring you back once we figure out the first layer of creativity. You can take us to the next level.
Love it.
All right.